Before I begin, I wanted to thank one of my backers, Dan Normie, for this video suggestion. If you're interested in hearing my thoughts on a certain topic or have an idea for a video, becoming a backer on Subscribestar gets your ideas heard and helps keep the channel going with the content that you want to hear. Link in the description. Now with that out of the way, let's get started. Many in our little sphere of internet and YouTube politics have had numerous discussions, debates, and response videos on what the right needs to do going forward. In fact, this discussion was the subject of the first video I had made on this channel. On the question as to where I stand on the subject, do I stand with the plebs or the aristocrats, as Academic Agent would say, my position is that I support both as vital avenues going forward. Now before one types into the comments that I'm not taking a clear stance, let me elaborate on what I mean. This video and this discussion is not a direct response to anyone out there. I think that despite the variety of ideas and disagreements that we might have, collectively we share a similar goal in wanting our communities, nations, and cultures to survive the coming winter and to one day emerge as the governing ideology once more. These are my observations and thoughts as to how we can hopefully achieve that one day. The elites, the vanguard class that you would want to initiate change structurally, need a reason to hedge their bets against the current regime. At the current moment, many of the wealthy and powerful have no problem currently co-opting the governing ideology for the purposes of keeping their businesses afloat, free from cancellation, and to maintain their revenues while conditioning the next generation to buy into the governing ideology to create their next consumer base. Actual pushback through political, legal, and communicative means from the plebs, which I am one of, is going to be necessary for the 20% of our Pareto Principle world to consider an alternative course of action. This pushback also means living a well-intentioned and virtuous life. What good is it to be a dissident to the current system if one is crippled by the vices of processed foods, microplastics, internet porn, and lewd streamers on the internet? A healthy life, with friends, a social life, good physical health is going to give you the energy and the natural gravitas that comes with being seen as an example and leader to your neighbors and friends. I'm not saying abandon your PC gaming or your 40k miniatures, but it's important to have a balance between the healthy and your leisure. But there also has to be a desire to win. I'm not telling you that you will become the next Napoleon or Caesar. Most of us will never be recorded in the history books, so we must find our immortality through other means. For many of us, that might be the spiritual salvation of Christ, but as the Distributus pointed out in his video, to be right-wing in 9 points, we all innately seek out a better life for ourselves, our families, and our communities, to reach to the end of our lives where one can say, he or she lived a good life. We can only do that by working within our means and networks, managing our risks, and finding avenues through communication and activism to find weaknesses in the system that can either give us new ground or return ground lost in our current political battle against the entropic encroachment of the left. So with that being said, I've outlined a few observations I think are quite applicable in the wake of what we've seen in the last few months and years. 1. Acknowledge your reality. If you live in a blue state or a heavily progressive area like London, Portland, or Paris, odds are that actual on-the-ground activism will be met with the full force of the state and the commissars of the governing ideology. This means knowing what you can and cannot do, storming public buildings, protests, and what was considered many traditionally to be criminal acts of protest like your left-wing counterparts who get away with it with the tacit endorsement of the state, is not going to be something that you can get away with. There is no neutrality. The law will not be applied equally before you, especially if you are white, not left-wing, and male. Victims of violence from the state will be ignored if you fit any of those categories. Even victims of interminority violence will be blamed on you despite having no tangible influence on said violence. You are living under occupation. Your resistance efforts must be done in a way that does not garner the attention of the state. In a political environment where the friend-enemy distinction reigns supreme, at least to the left, you will need to realize that if you aren't being treated like an enemy of the state, your time will come eventually. As for those living in rural, conservative, or red state areas, you are witnessing a train crash in real time in your own backyards. Between tech companies moving to North Carolina, Florida, or Texas, mounting an effective resistance to any sort of progressive change will become increasingly difficult as the yerba mate drinking techies begin to buy themselves into power and turn the state blue. This doesn't even begin to address refugee resettlement and immigration. For those in red states or areas akin to that abroad, you must acknowledge the reality that you are in a rearguard action. The left is coming for you, but it won't be all at once. It is gradual, all of its corruption. This gives you time to prepare, either for the things such as homeschooling, property buying, moving out of the cities of suburbs, and integrating yourself within your community so that you can take care of yourself and not be as heavily reliant on the soon-to-be corrupted institutions. Despite the revolutionary rhetoric of most of us Americans, many are concerned with the immediate needs before them, and this priority, and ostensibly low political energy, must be channeled into effective action. Acknowledging that there will be no 21st century of crossing the Delaware or storming the Bastille, that we know of, know that you are buying time in order to regroup and mount an effective resistance that doesn't necessarily involve the state scratching its itchy trigger finger for yet another Waco. Second, play a positive-sum game. I do not mean play a positive-sum game with the left, as they will never compromise with the right. They will always ask you to concede 90 to 99% before you get your 10 or even 1%. I'm telling you to play a positive-sum game with the right wing that exists in our current political and pundit class. Without a push from its local chapters or outspoken donors and activists, the Republicans will stay in their present form, as nothing more than impotent opposition. There is still a greater amount of networks, tools, and infrastructure that politically exist within these parties, and at the local level, they are incredibly accessible to the ordinary citizen. I would know, I've spoken at great length about its accessibility on how local party leaders slobber over the idea of young people getting involved. Again, only if it's worthwhile and not at substantial risk to your life and well-being. There's no sense in getting yourself hurt or killed. For better or for worse, we are seeing a positive-sum game move the right's dialogue further back to the right in talking points that many of us online would have discussed a few years ago that would have gotten you blocked by Tucker Carlson or Charlie Kirk. But now both are talking about demographic change, and Tucker just recently called the Immigration Act of 1965 an attack on American democracy far worse than what occurred last January. If this can happen nationally, imagine what you can do locally with more power and influence on state legislatures, county commissioners, and city councils. If these people can be pressured to take positions that we actually want to see achieved, then we must pursue these avenues. The more that we as dissident thinkers can put our ideas out there and for suggestions for policy and lifestyle, the more these ideas can be normalized, and often reintroduced after years of being declared problematic, back into the public consciousness. The more you can get people talking about your ideas and worldview and accepting of it, or at least being open to entertaining it, you're giving those potential rogue elites a reason to hedge their bets against the current governing ideology and regime. If we're going to be asking the wealthy and powerful to make a gamble that only they can afford, then the better it be to have the solid backing to move large quantities of people into that particular direction. 3. Defend your radicals. The left has been defending its radicals from Patty Hearst to Susan Rosenberg to Dr. Kendi now for decades. The right, as far back in recent memory of William F. Buckley has been destroying the John Birch Society, shows that we have never been able to defend our radicals. They are isolated, and then the rest of the right moves towards the center, which inevitably moves to the left. If you want to avoid the label of radical, which at this point will invite the security apparatus to your respective country and into your home life, then defend those further to the right of you. The pushback from the establishment over Nick Fuentes and his alleged no-fly list placement is a promising sign, as Daily Wire and Fox News types either mention his name directly or bring up the event itself. This is something that must happen, not just with the most outspoken, but with minor and local figures as well. If a radio commentator in your local area is being reamed or pushed to resign over a joke or opinion, come to his or her defense. This doesn't just apply to political commentary explicitly either, as even the most bare-bones act of defiance against the governing ideology, whether that's resistance to putting pronouns in the bio, or making an off-color joke about alphabet people, etc., that kind of behavior has to be defended, lest the precedent is established in your local community that someone's entire career and well-being can be destroyed in one swift swoop or hashtag. While there is something to be said about the efficacy of counter-protests and boycotts, supporting those that are under fire can help keep people going and allow them to maintain whatever their service or station that they are in. The most prominent example I can think of is Jack Posobiec seemingly single-handedly keeping Mike Lindell's business afloat with his constant barrage of memes, promo codes, and directly linking his website on Twitter and other platforms. We must do the same for our brick-and-mortar stores, controversial local news anchors, and so on. 4. Recognize and utilize lawfare. In one of the most litigious countries on earth, the United States, our use of law as a weapon should be invested further into the future. Many of our side talk about the inevitable global South Africa or global Zimbabwe in regards to the future of our political discourse and governance in the West. We must look towards funding, creating, and operating institutions in the West like that of AfriForum in South Africa. The United States does have groups that operate similarly, or could have the capacity to do so, such as the Pacific Justice Institute, or PGI. PGI is a conservative legal defense fund here in the US that operates in the defense of religious liberty and other freedoms through lawfare, whether that's suing the state of California for its COVID lockdown restrictions on churches, or suing states for allowing trans women to compete in girls-only sports teams. There is existing infrastructure to support and emulate when fighting back against the current mechanism of local and federal law. Whilst most of this is expensive, this is where crowdfunding and widespread support becomes so important in what is a difficult and expensive battlefield to achieve long-standing victory. The left has no problem coming back to court ad infinitum to get a victory even after 20 defeats in a row. While they may have the backing of millionaires in the established donor class, one can point to the massive crowdfunding success of people like Bernie Sanders and Marjorie Taylor Greene and how small donations can add up over time. Couple this fact with the call to push and defend more radical positions, an effective litigating tool can stall, overrun, or at the very least act as a money pit for the left to potentially abandon its position for a short period of time, buying us crucial months or years and even decades before they come back to it. Whether or not you're an attorney, there are various mechanisms to contribute to legal funds, conservative attorney organizations, all of which are greatly underutilized, and this is something I think that needs to change in the coming months and years ahead. 5. Be the best that you can be. I know that this sounds like something out of a motivational poster with a kitten hanging onto the tree branch, but there is a lot to be said about how personal conduct shapes the appearance and interest of a political movement. There is a lot to be said about how one's mental health and outlook will improve if you eat right, take up a hobby such as learning the piano or violin, and getting into shape. Quit tweeting that feel when no GF and actually start talking to the nice girl at church or at the park. While there is something to be said about the memes of online young men on the right lacking the social skills or taking care of themselves, there is no sense in trying to offer an alternative lifestyle or political worldview to that of the bugman if one cannot maintain a conversation, clean up after themselves, or care for their fellow men and their environment. This means creating something more than just hot takes on Twitter. Learn to care for the land, have a garden if possible, eat healthier and avoid processed foods, take up something that you enjoy and pass the skill down to your loved ones and children. Be fruitful and multiply. I know all of this sounds like I'm just spouting truisms or the latest point from Jordan Peterson's book and sloganeering, but there is truth to these statements. A man is happiest and fulfilled when he is with his community, family, faith, and can offer something to others with his or her own hands. The creation of art, poetry, craftsmanship, and even something useful like a technical or automotive repair skill goes a long way in being a community leader, and someone that your neighbors can trust, depend on, and see as someone who has a better way than what is the current state of our modern world. This also means choosing career fields that aren't going to be a great risk to your livelihood or put you in the crosshairs of the court of public opinion. This means if your town doesn't necessarily look like Mayberry, maybe don't sign up to be a white cop. 6. Be vigilant and practice good OPSEC. This means gatekeeping. The bigger the tent, the more likely it is to be taken into a direction that is antithetical to one's values and ideals. There is nothing inherently conservative about some disaffected knitting gal with a PhD who thinks that you can be open-minded to social and cultural decline and degeneracy if it means owning the libs. If you have no values of your own that make you willing to put your foot down for, then you're no better than your enemy. Make sure you're not risking or divulging information that could get you doxxed, and have a plan in place for when it eventually happens. As Curtis Garvin had recently quipped, if you're not meticulous enough to fly a Cessna, you're not meticulous enough to shitpost anonymously. Do not counter-signal to your enemies, and give them reason to attack you. One needn't be reminded of the now viral CIA recruitment video with quotes including cisgender millennial, proud woman of color, and the like. This does not mean counter-signal to those who are wishing to infiltrate your group or community, as Robert Conquest's second law is all too real. 7. Do not spread yourself too thin. There are 1,000 different flashpoints and 1,000 different hills, all worth dying on in regards to the current cultural and political battles and ones trying to change the current system. If you have a particular skill set that's better at one item over the other, focus on that particular avenue and give it your all. All of our contemporary conservative political activists, the one that is the most effective at this current point in time is Christopher Rufo, whose sole effort right now is getting critical race theory out of the school systems and curricula in the United States. He's been incredibly effective in getting states to sign on to and pass legislation banning CRT, and is pushing that wedge issue to be the wedge issue of all of them in the political sphere, getting parents and political aficionados aware of the indoctrination going on in their schools, even in lily-white liberal New England. Creating a million different fronts only makes you more vulnerable, but it also makes it easier to ignore the first observation I set out, which is that we do not have the resources that the left has, meaning that you have to acknowledge your reality. Be wise where our energy and efforts are being spent. If you have the subject matter experience in law, education, engineering, or a hard science, utilize your background to the best of your ability to change something in that particular field. This allows you to become a leader, ensures security in your own position, and ensures that you're not as vulnerable to others who are at every rally, event, and so on. Don't burn out by engaging in the reaction of everyone's day-to-day events and what comes on the news feed. Focus on what you know and what you can do to change it. 8. And I say this for my final point, and offer this as a potential avenue for a strategy going forward. Recently, there was a debate between Destiny and Richard Wolff, a professor espousing socialism and the go-to citation for breadtubers on the subject of their ideology, and having that all-too-important appeal to authority when it comes to internet blood sports. The debate itself, which I'll link in the description, was a poor performance on the good professor, and Destiny managed to handily throw him out on his rear with basic liberal and left-leaning talking points. I imagine, in this time of face masks and virtual lectures, that professors and academics of the left could be easily groyped, for a lack of a better term, in order to start delegitimizing them before their peers. I speak hypothetically here, but more work that could be done to delegitimize the academic class, which serves as the bean counters, narrative creators, and indoctrinators of the progressive cadre, then it would be in our own best interest to work to ask these questions, perhaps from a normie, even liberal perspective, to see how their worldview, policy, and epistemology doesn't hold up to the most basic scrutiny. This, I believe, could be an effective, low-effort, high-return approach at doing some kind of damage, as there is nothing more hated by the academic and the public left than ritual humiliation from their own side. This isn't a call for entryism or infiltration, but a simple method of publicly getting academics, students, and audience members to question the authority of the progressive professor and speaker. But these are just some of my thoughts on what we can do going forward, both on a personal and communal level, along with some ideas on what to do to spark action. For many of us, we may not have the capital or sway over large groups of people, plebeians or aristocrats, to initiate the change that we want. But this desire to change the system will not be something that happens overnight either. Do what you can to be self-reliant, virtuous, and prepared for when the mob comes to your community or your group of friends and cohorts. A long winter is ahead of us, but we all have a role to play, and we mustn't be discouraged. Be prudent, everybody. Thank you all for watching, and if you like this kind of work, a like and a share would be greatly appreciated. If you're not subscribed already, now would be a good time to do so. If you want to support me, there is a subscribe star link in the description, where you too, like the fine people above on screen, can have a say on what sort of commentary I provide and the subjects I cover. Merch is on the way, and until then, this is The Prudentialist, and I'll see you all in the next video.